So for the last video, I'll walk you through the basics of editing within Adobe Audition. So this has a much steeper learning curve for audio editing. There are some things that I would only do in Adobe Audition, and that's for the more complicated projects where you have lots of different audio sources, you have multiple voices, you have um, music, you have sound effects, you have multiple kinds of music and things like that. But the other thing that is I use Adobe Audition for would be for really, really fine-grained editing. So if you are doing a lot of moving things around within, from an interview or for a conversation, you're trying to get rid of ums, ahs, particles, things like that. That's where you'd want to use a program like Adobe Audition. Another program that is very similar into what it can do is Reaper, and that is a program you can get for free as well. Although now with that Michigan has is a creative cloud campus or whatever they're calling it, you have access to Adobe Audition. Again, I want to stress that if you're not doing this really fine grain editing, you probably don't need to do Audition. GarageBand would be totally fine. Okay, so just to quickly walk through the interface, you have two different kinds of editors in here. One is called the waveform editor. The other one is called the multi-track editor. So we'll look at both of them briefly. So the waveform, if you click waveform, that's going to open up a new audio file. Let's call that demo. And this is going to give us a destructive editor, just like Audacity. And so all of the limitations of destructive editors and drawbacks of destructive editors are in this one too. Let's do a quick recording. Let's make sure our inputs and outputs are set. Go to audio hardware. Again, because we don't have the other equipment that we normally would have, we just see built-in microphone and built-in output, and that is totally fine for now. We have our controls here at the bottom, like we saw in the other programs. So stop, play, pause, move to previous, rewind, fast forward, move to next, record, and then loop playback, and then skip selection. The main ones you'll be using will be just, the normal play, pause, stop, record, things like that. So you hit record, and then you should see the waveform start coming up in response to what you're saying and recording what you're saying. There's not an easy way to change the input gain in Audition. Mostly this program assumes you're working with another interface of some kind of like the Scarlett interface that we have in the Winberg room, but we don't have that today. So this is just a quick demonstration to get us some audio that we're going to edit. So destructive editor, very similar to Audacity in its functionality, mostly just highlighting and deleting. So we can delete that. We can delete this. And that's the easiest way to do that. One thing that is different in Audition is that you have these boxes on the top, and these are your fade bars. So let's say we delete that little bit of silence at the beginning, and we drag this over, and that's going to create a fade at the beginning. In response to what you're saying and recording what you're saying, there's not an easy way to. You can draw these in a variety of different ways. If you want this to be a very sudden fade, or you want it to be a very slow fade, you can do that. That's one of the things you can do in the destructive editor. Again, this should only be used if you are making changes that you aren't going to need to go back to, and even then, you'll want to make sure that you have a backup copy of this. So that's the basics of the destructive editor, the waveform editor as it's known. Now what we really want to use in Audition is the multi-track. And so we're going to click on multi-track, and we get a pop-up to make a new multi-track session. And so we hit OK, and now we are presented with multiple tracks similar to GarageBand. And so let's pull this demo file we recorded here in response to what you're saying and recording what you're saying. There's not an easy way to change the input gain. Mostly this program assumes you're working with another interface of some kind of like the Scarlett interface that we have in the. So what I want to show you in this is really the fine grain editing. So just like GarageBand, you can either pull from the side when you see that red bar pop up, or you can use the R command and just hit R, and it's going to give you a razor tool, and then you can delete on either side of there. If you see it go to 2 razors, that's going to cut across all the different tracks you have set up. So if we had multiple copies of this, and I had it set to 2 razors, then it will cut all of those. You can undo all of that. One thing you want to have turned on for sure in this is toggle snapping. So this is what happens when you want it to automatically sort of lock to the clip next to it. If you don't have this turned on, you can turn it on and off by hitting S. You think you're moving it really close, but you're not actually moving it close. Sometimes this is really helpful when you're trying to do a really fine edit, but oftentimes I'll just keep that turned on in general because it makes things a lot easier. So if we listen to this, gain, mostly this program assumes you're working. So I want to take a couple things out of there. So I'm going to take out gain, so I can do it that way. Mostly. Now let's try to get rid of the mostly here. Mostly. So we just want to say mostly. Mostly. So we hear that little glitch there beforehand. Again, it's a little hard to hear because we don't have the you know, the input settings and the speakers and microphones that we would normally have. But so we can keep trying to adjust this. Mostly this. That's pretty good. We could make it a little smoother even with a little fade up there. Mostly this program assumes you're working with another interface of some kind, kind of like the Scarlett gain. This program assumes there's another little bit there. I can just hit that, delete that, and then you can move this over. Now, something that is also, you can only find in Audition or a couple other similar programs like Reaper and Logic as well, as is making what are called crossfades. So instead of having to, draw with those keyframes like in GarageBand, you can just literally drag this over and it will create a crossfade, meaning that this track, this snippet will fade down as this one fades up. This program assumes you're working with it. Mostly this program assumes you're working with it. So this is a way to smooth out edits where you are trying to remove ums, uhs, particles, things like that. And this is really, really helpful if you are recording interviews and editing interviews. If you're doing something scripted or more scripted, those words shouldn't necessarily be in there unless they're scripted to be in there. Some kind of like the Scarlett. So let's see if we can find another one of those interface that we have. So let's close this gap up. So again, we can just cut on either side of that. We want to get rid of this interface. And then we can just drag this over. Let's see how that sounds. Like the Scarlett interface that we. It's pretty good. I might do a little fade here. Like the Scarlett interface that we have in the Winberg room, but we don't have that today. So this is just a quick demonstration to get us some audio. So let's fix that hiccup there. So this is just a quick demonstration to get us some. So let's see if we can get that first little hiccup gone. Quick demonstration to get us some audio. So let's do a crossfade first. Let's see. This is just a quick demonstration to get us some audio. So that sounds like we went too close. So then we can go over a little bit more. Demonstration to get us some audio that we're going to edit. So that sounds pretty good to my ear. You do have the keyframe option here as well. So if you didn't want to do the raising and lowering things within a track, you can totally do that still. And let's demonstrate that with a piece of music. So I just dropped in a piece of music here, and we can do something similar to what we did before. We want to have this play for a little bit. This is going to be loud off the bat, So I'm going to use this control here just to enter in -6, and that's going to drop it down 6 dB. It probably will still be too loud. Mostly, this program assumes you're working with another. So it's definitely still too loud, but let's drop the volume down. So just like before, we can put these markers on there, and then let's drag this out a little bit because we want to fade it up after this is done. So we're going to make 4 markers to make a little valley for this audio. Let's see how this sounds. Mostly, this program assumes you're working with another interface of some kind. So it's getting there. I think it'd be a little quieter here. Mostly, this program assumes you're working with another interface of audio that we're going to edit. So it's pretty good before. We can move this one over a little bit. There's some audio that we're going to edit. It's a little too quick. Audio that we're going to edit. You know, there's no hard and fast rule for this. You know, your sense of story and your sense of sound will help you determine what's the right spot. If you want another opinion, feel free to email ShapiroDesignLab@UMich, and we'd be happy to give it a listen and give you some guidance on that. A couple other things just before we finish up. You have your same mute and solo buttons here. So mute to mute just that track, solo to mute all the other tracks besides that one. The R button is something if you were going to record directly into this. And so let's say I wanted to record a piece of voiceover on this. I'm going to mute this, hit record, and then I can start recording right onto this track. You know, there are personal preferences of whether you want to record directly into your session or you want to record separately and then cut all of this stuff in. My preference is to record separately and cut all that in. I think it gives me a bit more flexibility. But if there's a way that works better for you just to do that, go for it. Just make sure that you're not covering something up inadvertently and that all of your files are stored in the same place. So if you wanted to save the project and come back to work on it later, you would click Save, and that's going to save an Adobe Audition session file. And you can use that, come back to that later. Now, crucially, all of the media needs to be stored with that. It doesn't go into a single package like GarageBand does, so you need to make sure that you know where all of your media is. And if you haven't done this before, please reach out. We have some strategies and some tips for organizing your media that will save you a lot of headache in the end. If you're ready to finalize, you go to Export and then Multi-Track Mixdown, and then do Entire Session. And that's going to mix everything down from multiple tracks into that single file that you can share with someone. And they have the same options, WAV, MP3, AIFF, things like that. So again, this is the steepest learning curve of the 3 programs, Audacity, GarageBand, and Audition. But this definitely has the most power to do the most kind of fine-grained editing, you know, to do the full range of editing from very basic things all the way up to the more complicated, complex editing that could include multiple tracks, fine-grained editing out of ums and ahs and particles and things like that. So as I've said a couple times now, please feel free to reach out to ShapiroDesignLab@umich.edu if you have further questions or how you think this will fit with your project or things that you might want to try. Reach out anytime and we can schedule a consultation either with myself or with one of the audio interns.